Okay.
Oh, there it is.
Here, you can start recording there.
Okay.
Are you recording? You can see the green light, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, and then you just push it again and the green light goes off and you're done. There you go. Come on, bring it up.
Pull it up.
Bring it up.
What you doing, Jonathan?
I'm putting these snails away. Watch this. They'll stick to me if I leave it there for a while.
Sunday worship service, and I'm very proud of the kind of heritage that we have, and delighted to be able to do this. But I did call upon all of my cousins, and we are going to be putting together a program this morning that is predominantly the fourth generation of the Montgomery family that will be leading this morning's worship service. So I've called upon a lot of my cousins to participate. I do want to thank my mother also for providing me with some suggestions for traditional hymns that I remember, certainly from the many worship services that I attended in my grandfather's church and at Uncle Paul's and at Muskingum. So I hope that we'll enjoy this morning's fellowship. But before we begin with our call to worship, and I did provide everybody with a program with hymns in it, and we can follow through with this. But before I do that, I'd just like to remind everyone that we should be keeping, not only now but throughout the coming weeks, Aunt Ruth, who is not with us today. Keep her in our thoughts and prayers. And for those of you who perhaps have not made a note or written a note to her, please do that before you leave and add it to the book that's being put together to deliver to her. Let's begin with our call to worship then. Our help is in the name of the Lord.
Our help has come to us in times of crisis and troubles, even in the midst of our busy lives.
So that we may rely on our helper, who is also our God.
We are here together to seek that help and that guidance.
We're going to sing God of Our Fathers, and Maggie will give us a chord so that we can begin.
Yep.
Sing with gusto here this morning.
This one has my introduction. Sorry, I told you there was no introduction.
Okay, off already.
Shining worlds in splendor through
horses, and thank you very much, Maggie. I hope you all caught that. There was a little test in that for you, on thy thisome way. It's a different version of the hymn. But at this time, I'd like to call on Jeff Brunner, who will read us a scripture from Philippians.
This is, my grandmother thought that this would be appropriate and asked that we read this. I'm going to read verses 4 through 13. May you always be joyful in your union with the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. Show a gentle attitude towards everyone. The Lord is coming soon. Don't worry about anything, but in all your prayers ask God for what you need, always asking Him with a thankful heart. And God's peace, which is far beyond human understanding, will keep your hearts and minds safe in union with Christ Jesus. In conclusion, my brothers, fill your minds with those things that are good and that deserve praise, things that are true, noble, right, pure, lovely, and honorable. Put into practice what you learned and receive from me both from my words and from my actions. And the God who gives us peace will be with you. In my life in union with the Lord, it is great joy to me that after so long a time you once more had the chance of showing that you care for me. I don't mean that you stopped caring for me, you just had no chance to show it. And I am not saying this because I feel neglected, for I have learned to be satisfied with what I have. I know what it is to be in need, what it is to have more than enough. I've learned there is a secret, so that anywhere, anytime, I am content. Whether I am full or hungry, whether I have too much or too little, I have the strength to face all conditions by the power that Christ gives me.
Now Dave Pollock will lead us in our litany.
Will you join with me responsibly in this reading? For parents whose love has sustained family life over centuries.
We thank thee, O Lord.
For mothers who in patience have directed small children through the growing years of life.
We thank thee, O Lord.
For fathers whose trust has led youth to strive for and realize high ideals.
We thank thee, O Lord.
For grandparents whose integrity has served as a bulwark in times of temptation.
We thank thee, O Lord.
For grandmothers whose concern has been a reminder that the home is the strong foundation of life.
We thank thee, O Lord.
For grandfathers who by the example of their faith have been a beacon to things of spiritual worth.
We thank thee, O Lord.
You bow your heads in prayer, and I will read a prayer written by and used by J. Knox Montgomery, called My Daily Desire. To awaken each morning with a smile brightening my face, to greet the day with reverence for the opportunities it contains, to approach my work or school with a clear mind, to hold ever before me, even in the doing of little things, the ultimate purpose toward which I am working, to greet boys and girls and men and women with laughter on my lips and love in my heart, to be gentle and kind and courteous through all the hours, to approach night with the weariness that ever woos sleep and the joy that comes from work well done, to be ambitious, whether at home or absent, to be well-pleasing unto Him. This is how I desire to waste wisely the days of 1930. Amen. Will you join with me in the Lord's Prayer? Our Father, who art in heaven,
Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
For this morning's meditation, what I've done is to ask other grandchildren of my generation to give us a brief remembrance of their grandparent. And so we have a representative from each of the 6 family branches, the 6 children of J. Knox and Emma Patton Montgomery, who will give us some moments of reflection and remembrance on our grandparents. And I'd like to begin with Ray Kohler, who is going to help us remember Uncle Knox. Even though that is not Ray's grandfather, he is going to help us out this morning and help us remember Uncle Knox.
John Knox was a second child, and I think that I'm a second child. I think that's why we're called on. And as a second child, I always depend on someone else, and so I want to thank Margie for what I'm going to say today. John Knox Montgomery was, besides being a second child, the first son of John Knox Sr. and Emma Patton. He stuttered as a small child and was never comfortable speaking in public. Felt somewhat inferior to his three brothers, and probably his father as well. However, he had a wonderful dry sense of humor and was persuaded to speak to the Muskingum students in chapel a couple of times a year. One habit he had was taking off his glasses while speaking and putting them on, and this was made fun of by student comedians. He was rather serious and intimidating, but many students during the Depression years and World War II were able to stay in college as he found them custodial jobs to do around the college to pay for their tuition. One memorable homecoming, Knox renewed his childhood playing of the violin with secret lessons from the music department and performed in a trio at the talent show and received a standing ovation. Knox was known around New Concord as a terrible driver, and more than once his car had to be pulled out of the lake. It was Knox who congratulated Mollie for having a mind of her own when she went against tradition and joined the, I couldn't make this word out. I'm sorry, Kind Club of Muskingum. Knox wrote wonderful family letters, not as often as the other members of the family, but all enjoyed his sense of humor and philosophy of life. It was Knox and Emmy Lou Riley who planned for the 1966 family reunion in New Concord. That was the first successful reunion of the family. Knox categorized himself as grumpy, but those who knew him well remember him as kind, caring, humorous, steady. It was Bob who solicited money for the college, but it was Knox who was keeper of the funds and used them wisely to make Muskingum what it is today. And just to end, it was also Knox who, when I first arrived at Muskingum College, I was told that by the football coach to get my hair cut. Can't believe it was too long. But I went down to the barber there on the street through New Concord, and I hadn't brought any money. I hadn't thought about that. And I was wondering, what am I going to do? I just gotten my hair cut, and I looked out the window, and there was John Knox walking by. And so I grabbed him. And I don't think it was Muskingum College funds that he gave me. He paid for my haircut, and I hope I paid him back.
And now I'll call on Maggie to remember Aunt Geneva, her grandmother.
When I think of grandmother, I think of her apartment. I still sometimes go through every inch of it in my mind. As a kid, I think your physical surroundings become pretty important because I remember the same thing, doing the same thing with Aunt Ruth's house. And I can picture exactly every object in her apartment and where everything was. It became so familiar to us. I think about how she moved out every time the seven of us came down so that we could stay. I remember her dresser and all the mysteries of her top drawer. She probably has no idea how fascinated I was with the top drawer of her dresser. I remember her clothes, all the beautiful dresses, all the shoes, all the gloves, all the hats. I remember all the dinners. Sour cream cake with Canucci frosting, vanilla ice cream with grandmother's special chocolate sauce that hardened when you poured it on the ice cream. I don't know if we ever had any other desserts with grandmother, but those are the only ones I remember. When I think of grandmother, I think of the brick church. I think of Sundays at brick church. I think of grandmother in her robe. We were all sure that grandmother was in charge of everything, including the minister. When I think of grandmother, I think of church fairs, I think of mother-daughter dinners, I think of all the bounty that we got from the church fairs, I think of boxes from vests with beautiful clothes in them. I think of grandmother in Amherst. I think of her reading us stories while we were all gathered around her in the morning. her hair in a long braid, and all the hairpins on the dresser. I think of grandmother calling on the phone. You could hear her voice anywhere in the house through the phone. I think of grandmother endlessly strong as she whipped up the fudge or the penucci into shape. Somehow, grandmother seemed to even be in charge when she was at our house. I also think of grandmother standing beside me in church. In New York, we never got to participate in church service with grandmother. But in Amherst, when she'd come, she'd stand beside me, and I was just amazed at her voice, her strong singing voice, and how she could harmonize it with all the hymns. I think of grandmother, the traveler, bringing us back treasures from all over the world. I think of all the native outfits that she acquired. And I remember hearing talk of her slide presentations, which, as I understand it, were always absolutely terrific. Not so often I think of grandmother at Rockridge. I think of her when she started to not be so well, and she was at home with us for a while, and along around October, convinced that every plane that went overhead had Uncle Jim in it because he was coming for Christmas. I remember pushing grandmother in her wheelchair after she was at Cozy Corners, and her humming hymns as we walked along in the sunshine. And I'll always remember being with her when she died and mentioning all of our names, one after the other, so that she'd know that we were all with her in spirit. When I think of grandmother, I sometimes think of somebody who was kind of bossy, somebody who wasn't particularly, in some ways, patient. Think of somebody who was full of energy. I also remember that she wasn't particularly fond of conflict. And sometimes when my daughter Geneva says, "Mommy, can't we all be more pleasant?" I think of grandmother too. But when I think of grandmother, I think of someone who was small in size, but larger than life to me in virtually every other way. And I'm so glad that we named our daughter Geneva. It's an unusual name. People always comment on it. So I have lots of opportunity to proudly say, it's pronounced Geneva. She's named after her great-grandmother.
Thanks, May. Now I'd like to call on Debbie for a little remembrance of Uncle Bob.
Robert Montgomery was my grandfather, and we used to call him Bob-Eye because I had heard the students at Muskingum refer to him as Dr. Bob for many years. I was about 9 when he died in 1967, so most of my memories of him are of Bob-Eye playing with me and my brother and sister. Bob-Eye had this incredibly thick, wavy hair, and he used to lie on my great-grandmother's sofa and let me comb it and mess it up and comb it and mess it up and comb it and mess it up. And any man that would let a 9-year-old play with his hair for hours on end like that had to be all right. But since his death, I've learned that there's a lot more to Bob-Eye than high tolerance for 9-year-olds. And one thing I've learned about him is that he strongly believed that one person can make a difference in other people's lives. And I asked my grandmother Montgomery if she knew of one of Bob-Eye's favorite Bible verses that she could share with me, and it deals with this point, and I'd like to read it to you now. It comes from Ecclesiastes 12, verse 11. A wise man's words are like goads, his collect saying like nails driven home, when they put the mind of one man in many lives.
And Bill Montgomery will remember Uncle Paul.
Paul Spence Montgomery was my grandfather, and we knew him as Pup-Up. And Pup-Up was also the person that I could tell people I got my red hair from. And, I saw the description in there as fiery. But my memories of Pup-Up go back to Aspinwall, Pennsylvania, outside Pittsburgh, where he was a minister. And I can remember back and watching him, and I still remember when he was preaching and giving a sermon and being just so proud that that was my grandfather up there preaching to everybody else. And it was such a neat feeling, special feeling, that he was a minister, and I really was very proud of him. But aside from the professional aspects of my grandfather, it was also special in his athleticism. I shared that with him, and he was a very good athlete. In fact, when he was young, I think we've all seen the pictures, his barrel chest and his big muscles, and I can remember the way he used to hold me and kind of give me the punch and shake my hand very strong. And I think all the other grandchildren will remember his sense of humor. And if there was ever a piano in the room, he'd go up and he had this little jingle that he'd do, and it was just terrific. I'm not sure I ever heard him do another. It's the only thing I ever heard him do, but boy, it was good. And at holidays, my uncle would give some neat cards to my grandmother and his unique gift wrapping, and he'd always take all the bows and stick them over his head. And, you know, that's just kind of the corny and the sense of humor that kept things upbeat with my grandfather. And I guess in later years, as his health wasn't quite as good, he took a lot of pleasure in taking a walk around the block and smoking a cigar. And I think that during those years that he was just very proud of his family and took a lot of pride in his wife, his children, grandchildren. And just looking back, I have a lot of good memories. And you know, having a fiery redheaded grandfather was a lot of fun. Now I'm trying to learn here how to get a little fiery little guy, a little redhead, and learning how to do that. So those are my memories. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. And Melissa will remember Aunt Grace more.
Well, it's interesting that I was sort of chosen by my group to speak because, well, I was named after her. My middle name is Grace, and I'm anxiously awaiting, although not planning, to have a daughter, hopefully, that I would love to name Grace. And really, in a way, my grandmother gave me a very interesting gift because her passing was when I understood what death meant. And I remember my mom explaining it to me, and that I wasn't going to see grandmother anymore. I do remember her giving me various lessons, and one of them, of course, was, and she told me with great earnestness, that I really mustn't put my sugar on my cereal before I put the milk on. And I must put the milk on first and put the sugar on afterwards because then the sugar would stick. And I remember, of course, being at her house and the very particular smell that her closet had. And I used to spend quite a lot of time just looking at her clothes and being fascinated by the two huge rubber bands that were used to hold up her stockings. And I really couldn't quite understand why somebody would purposely put these things on their legs. But, and of course, everybody remembers her driving technique, which was through underneath the steering wheel. And so I think everybody was a little bit more excited when Grandfather Rastus would drive, even though, you know, his hands were like this, but it was better than driving with her. And as Carla and I were driving up here, probably everybody's best memory of her was how understanding she was and how caring she could be. And of course she had that feisty Montgomery spirit. But Carla was telling me of a story when Wynn and I remember jumping on the bed at 305 West Granada, and Carla and Alona, I think, had been both jumping on the bed, and they broke the leg on the bed. And of course we're terrified. And remember remember going to
grandmother and saying, "What will we do? Our father is going to get us." Grandmother said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." And she was she did take care of everything. She went and got Uncle Tom, who went to the garage and got a piece of petrified wood. And together we all conspired in the bedroom and fixed the bed. And many years later, when grandmother was very old and I went to visit her, sure enough, underneath the bed in the corner was the piece of petrified wood. But she, Alona and I always found her to be very caring and loving and sort of took us in and welcomed us.
And I think we all have fond memories of her, and I think I can't wait to bring in a fifth generation with the name Grace.
This is a letter that I wrote to my grandfather from Israel in 1979. This is Don Montgomery. I could give you presents, but a man who's been around for 70 or 80 years doesn't need much. Besides, whatever I gave you could never compare with the gifts you've given me for the past 28 years. The only thing I can think of is to give you an accounting of the gifts given to me so unselfishly by you. I'm not talking about footballs or catcher's mitts or neckties or cologne. You've given me all those too. The gifts I'm talking about are far more important to me because I use them every day. Here they are. A Christian education, not just Sunday school, but living examples of what to do with the 10 Commandments and the Golden Rule. A strong sense of ethical behavior, not just philosophical notions, but a real sense of what's right and wrong. Values development, maybe not the same as yours, but a few years has changed us all. The important feature is that what we believe is harmful to no one. A sense of unselfishness, I'm still working on this one, but your example is a target for me. And a mind void of prejudice. Bigotry was never a part of my education. The list could continue. The fact remains that we are different in many ways, but when I recall these gifts that I continue to use daily, the differences are negligible. The things that you've given me never wear out, and someday I hope to pass them along to my own children. When I left the States a year and a half ago, it occurred to me that we may never see each other again. Let's face it, you aren't getting any younger, and Israel's not the safest place in the world to be. Just once, before we head our separate directions, I want you to know that all the gold in Jerusalem or all the oil in Arabia could never pay for the gift that my grandfather gave me. Love at Christmas time and always, Dick. Let's join together in the hymn, Blessed Be the Tie That Binds. Are we going to have an introduction this time, man?
Fellowship of kindred
At this time in our program, we'll take time to remember those who were at our last reunion who have since passed. And I'd like to call on Doug Riley to remember Gertrude Montgomery.
I remember Gertrude as my grandmother, breaking the bloodline.
And special responsibility here because I believe maybe Bobby's family is the only one that is not represented here. And Bobby's 3 children, I know we want to remember them too. Young Bobby and Denny, who's a lawyer, and Maureen.
And Phil.
And Phil. And good old Phil.
How do you
And, but I am sorry that nobody is here to represent that side of the family. At any rate, Bobby Montgomery, for you youngins and whatever, Bobby was Joe College back in the 30s. Right? I mean, he was he was cool, and he was handsome, and he knew it. And Bobby, of course, the son of Jay Knox and Aunt Mary, and the brother of Harold, all of course of whom are gone now. But Bobby, after graduating from Muskingum, decided to go to law school. We thought he was going to be like, of course, the great Barry Montgomery, but he decided he left law school and went to divinity school, went to become a preacher. And he's the only one of the next generation who did become a minister. However, and you young adults need to realize that he wasn't quite in the same mold as we were accustomed to. It was not necessarily the good old religion, you know, in the Bible. Bobby was an intellectual and a thinker. And of course, some of us in the family are also intellectuals and thinkers. And Bobby's introduced us to names like Paul Tillich and Reinhold Niebuhr and Soren Kierkegaard. And Bobby became a minister, and his first parish was in Scarborough, New York, on the Hudson River. A beautiful place up on the Hudson. And I loved his sermons. And they were very deep. Of course, when you got through with the sermon, you never quite knew what Bobby actually said, but it was very impressive, and I loved it. And Bobby was a minister there in Scarborough, New York. Then went to Princeton University as the Presbyterian minister to the students at the university. And my sister and her family and I had association with him there. And he was a wonderful, warm person. And of course, some of the older generation didn't quite understand some of his theological ideas. But he did introduce me to the one thing that I'll always be thankful for Bobby Montgomery to give me, because he knew how to enjoy life and enjoy it. Because, of course, we were raised with the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, alcohol, of course, the evil John Barleycorn. And so Bobby Montgomery, the minister, and the handsome minister with his collar and his, he introduced me to the glories of the cocktail hour. I always thank him for that. But seriously, Bobby, too, was gracious. I never, you could sit with him and talk. He was warm. He was accepting. He was a warm father to his children and to his husband, to his wife, Betty. And I just, sorry that none of his children are here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Now Carla is going to remember Tom.
Tim Moore, who was living in Hong Kong, called me and asked if I would read a tribute that he has written to his father. And so this might be difficult for me to get through. I'm going to read it, and hopefully I might need some assistance. It is very difficult to write about one's own father. After Jean, Stan, and others, including Peter, said such moving things about him in January at the memorial service, I can only add what I remember the most about my dad. I remember Dad in many ways. I remember his grin and his laugh. It was always big, and it was always filled with joy. I remember the way he'd bring home some frozen pie crusts and lemons, just in case I wanted to make some lemon meringue pies. And then how he'd say, ooh la la, in appreciation when I put them on our dining table. I remember him crouched over a sketch pad, his eyes screwed up against the paper, his hands furiously sketching while he explained what this room would be and what furniture would go where. Or at Fire Island, having Mom, Peter, and me hold 2x4s here and there so he could show us what the walls or deck or trellis would look like eventually. Dad had so much vitality, I don't even think he realized how much he had. Yet there was always something so vulnerable about him, even while he was so violent. I think I only came to appreciate this in the past several years. He struggled through and went beyond his poor eyesight, a bad foot, and even depression. I guess he was always too busy struggling to get his ideas, his designs, and his emotions out of him to bother with these such ailments. One of my favorite memories of Dad occurred last summer. We rented a car and we drove up on the Hudson River together. We stopped at the Vanderbilt Mansion near Hastings-on-Hudson, and Dad took in every room, every detail, telling me all about McKim Meat and White along the way. That evening we stayed at a local bed and breakfast, and we had a wonderful meal at a restaurant housed in a building from the Revolutionary War period. Dad ate with great relish, admiring the house, the food, all the time conversing on every subject you can imagine. And the next morning I woke up to find his room empty. Since he had been suffering a lot at the time, I was very worried and I rushed downstairs. I saw him calmly sitting at the breakfast table outdoors. He had woken early, probably in pain, and he had already gone for a walk down the lane. He had had a long morning swim, and he had had a conversation with the proprietor about the inn. And there he was, dressed impeccably in a bow tie and button-down shirt, looking so contented and happy as he surveyed the country scene. I wish I could be there with you all today. Excuse me. Here. He would love to have been there.
Family meant so much to Dad, including each one of you at the reunion today. He would have loved to have been there, seeing the family again, ohing and awing over the food and remembering stories from the past. I'm sure each of you has a special memory of my dad. I hope you remember it today, and the love and the vitality he always had. That is something I will always have and will always remember.
And this is signed Tim Moore.
We'll sing the benediction, and then Mollie, when we finish, stay where you are. When we finish this hymn, stay where you are, and Mollie will make an announcement about our photography session that'll take place right after our hymn. If we can take a break for a little makeup and those kinds of things afterwards. But before we sing the hymn,